Chapter 27. The Worst Kind of Torture. The nightmare touched down in the courtyard, flames licking up from his hooves. Castle Ravenloft, with all its looming towers, stood tall and ominous around them. Here again, Navarra thought. But this time she was alone. All hope of finding Keithlan or breaking the curse was far from her mind. When she slid down from the horse's back, she noticed Anastasia standing by the grand door, waiting. The vampire spawn gave her a cold glare. Strahd dismounted and waved his hand in a precise pattern. The nightmare vanished, probably to another plane of existence. "Navarra," Strahd said, "I am glad you have finally accepted your place at my side. And I know that you love me, but—" He lifted her chin with his hand, and she could see malice in his red eyes. "I fear your friends have poisoned you against me. You have conspired with them to defy me, and I cannot let that go unpunished. Or do you deny that is what they are doing, plotting my demise?" Navarra wrenched her chin from his grasp, and cast her gaze to the ground. She could not bear to look at him. What would he do? Suck her dry as he had Gertruda? "Hand over your things," he said. Navarra gave him her pack without complaint. "And your focus," he added, looking at the green crystal pendant around her neck. Navarra did as she was told, and waited. She had been trying to plan what she was going to say during their long flight over the valley, but now her thoughts were all muddled with fear and sadness. Strahd went through her pack: a journal, a candle, some clothing, some dried pork, 2 vials of holy water. He handed those to Anastasia. A golden flower, a luck charm, a few pencils, and Vasily's scarf. He smirked at the scarf. "My lord," Navarra said, "if I may be so bold, I'd like to keep just one thing." Strahd raised an eyebrow. The expression briefly reminded her of Henry. "May I keep my free will?" Navarra's heart raced. She had no bargaining chips, nothing that could stop him from killing her now. She had nothing else to lose but her life. But before she lost her confidence, she went on. "I would like to have a clear mind, not affected by your charming influence. I'm sure Rahadin needs no charming to serve and follow you loyally." Strahd scoffed. "Rahadin has proven his loyalty. We shall see the extent of yours." He waved his hand and whispered a spell. At once Navarra felt an intrusive presence among her thoughts. It was a strange feeling, not painful, but deeply uncomfortable, as Strahd dissected her mind with his magic. "You are not hiding anything from me, are you, Navarra?" It was as though invisible tendrils were weaving through the clutter of dread and misgiving that clouded her thoughts. What did he mean? Hiding what? She had already given him her things. She breathed heavily. I don't think so." "Very well," Strahd said after a minute, and dropped the mind-reading spell. "Tonight you will stay in the dungeon. There you can think about where your loyalties lie. Anastasia?" The consort nodded to her master and gestured for Navarra to follow her. "One more thing," Navarra said, almost as a whisper. Her knees were shaking, but she had to ask, "May I keep my candle?" Strahd picked up the candle and cast a spell over it. Then he gave it to his prisoner and walked away. She clutched the candle to her chest, breathing a sigh of relief. Navarra followed Anastasia to the dungeons. The rooms she passed and the stairs she descended along the way were a blur of tears. She hated crying. She promised herself that tonight would be the last time she cried, no matter how long she might be held prisoner. Anastasia led her down dark passageways without any torchlight, but Navarra's elf eyes could still see fairly well. She stayed close behind her guide until they came to the bottom of a staircase into a flooded corridor. There Anastasia cautioned her to step exactly where she stepped, not veering to the right or left. Navarra watched as the vampire zigzagged in a well-rehearsed series of steps through the inky water. Then she carefully followed in Anastasia's footsteps, or as best she could tell without seeing the floor. The water came up to her hips and made her shiver. Finally, Anastasia stopped at an iron door on the right-hand side of the corridor. She turned a key and opened it, revealing a flooded chamber with 8 prison cells, 4 to the left and 4 to the right. The vampire pointed at the first cell. "This is where you'll be staying." A small flight of stairs descended into the chamber, making the water even deeper here. It came up to Navarra's neck as she half waded, half swam inside. She leaned her head back, standing on tiptoes to breathe, and lifted her candle above the surface. As soon as she entered the cell, the vampire locked it, then locked the chamber door and left. A minute after the sound of Anastasia sloshing through the water had faded, Navarra heard a voice calling. It was distant, but it came from somewhere in the dungeons. "Who's there?" Navarra asked. But sounds echoed strangely, and she could barely make out the response. The distant voice called its name several times before Navarra understood. "Van Richten, is that you?" Navarra called back. "Yes," said the voice. "Oh, Van Richten, it's me. It's Navarra. I'm here too." They went on calling back and forth, trying to understand what the other was saying, but it was impossible to keep up a conversation. Navarra wanted to yell that she was going to get them both out, but she had no plan, and didn't think it would be wise to shout about escaping. She had not seen anyone aside from Anastasia, but she knew the Count must have other guards patrolling the dungeons. Hadn't Rowan said there were ghouls? Navarra whispered a cantrip and gesticulated her fingers over her candle. At least there were still some simple spells she could cast without a focus or materials. The candle burned, and Gostomir appeared. "Navarra!" he said. She could see his image standing beside her in the water. "Oh, Gostomir," she said. "I've really gotten myself into it this time." She told him everything and began to tear up when she recounted the grim calamity that had transpired at Yester Hill. "I had to do it. Strahd was going to kill him. He was going to kill Henry. He had already killed Rowan." "Navarra, listen to me." Gostomir's voice grew serious as he spoke. "You were very brave. You saved your friend. Now we need to save you." "I can't beat Strahd on my own. I know that. But what can I do?" "Let's not think about beating Strahd. Right now, our only goal should be keeping you alive." Navarra agreed. "I have an idea," she said. "I think it will help the others too. I need to keep Strahd distracted. Keep him away from Henry and Irina. And Rowan. I saw her body turn to mist right before I jumped onto the nightmare. I believe she's still alive. But Strahd could go after them again, any time he wants. They need to find the last item from the prophecy. I need to buy them time." "You think you can keep Strahd distracted from down here?" "No. I'll need to get out of here." Navarra's teeth chattered. "The next time I see him, I'll be as friendly as possible. I must convince him that I'm on his side somehow." Gostomir's forehead creased. "Be careful, Navarra. You don't want him liking you too much." The hours crawled by, and she thought the long night would never end. Perhaps the dawn had already come. There was no way of knowing in this darkness. But Gostomir kept her company. When they heard splashing in the corridor, the archfey disappeared. Anastasia was back. She dipped her head under the water to unlock the cell and opened its iron bars. Then she ordered Navarra to follow her. Navarra felt stiff with cold and was very weak, but she followed. The vampire led Navarra all the way up to the 4th floor, to the lounge and bedroom where she had stayed with her friends after their dinner with Strahd. It was morning, and a tray of cinnamon cakes with fresh fruit sat on a table near the 4-poster bed. Lying on the bed was a slim red dress and Navarra's black journal. Opposite the bed, a warm fire in a stone hearth was beginning to thaw her numb body. A maid, the one who had waited on them at the dinner, came into the room.
"My name's Helga,"
the maid said in a diminutive voice. She had bright orange hair and freckles and looked no older than a human of 18.
"I'll be taking care of you. After you dress, I'll do your hair and makeup however you like."
Anastasia circled the maid with a haughty air.
"A couple of years ago, Strahd thought Helga might be the one. Can you imagine, Navarra, this homely creature being Tatiana?"
The girl ignored the vampire and went about preparing brushes and powders on the table. When Anastasia left, Navarra sat down by the fire. Her aching legs needed a rest.
"It's a pleasure to meet you, Helga,"
she said, wanting to show the girl as much kindness as she could. The gods only knew how poorly she had been treated since coming to Ravenloft.
"How would you like your hair, my lady?" "Do whatever you think is best," Navarra said. "Whatever Strahd might like."
While Helga worked, Navarra asked her questions about the castle and about Strahd, but the maid was reserved, mostly answering yes or no, without further explanation. As far as Navarra could make out, the maid was responsible for doing housework, with help from a magical broom and 2 witches who resided in the attic.
"Witches?"
Navarra asked.
"You mean like druids?" "No,"
Helga said.
"They're the ones who made all the dresses in your closet."
She opened the closet door to reveal a dozen gowns of varying color and style. They all looked to be Navarra's size. When Helga's work on Navarra was done, she told her that Strahd awaited her presence in his study. Navarra swallowed. After finishing breakfast, she followed Helga down to the 3rd floor, and soon entered another room with a blazing hearth. A low wooden table, polished to a mirror finish, sat in the center of the room, and all around it sprawled a luxurious rug. Old books with oiled leather covers sat neatly on the shelves that lined the walls. Opulent couches and chairs were arranged about the room, and, sitting in one of the high-backed chairs, was Strahd, holding a small box in his hand. "Navarra," he said, smiling and getting to his feet. He dismissed Helga and kissed Navarra's hand. She cringed at his touch, but forced a smile. "Have you had enough time to reflect?" he asked. All the coldness in his demeanor from the previous day was gone.
"Oh, yes,"
Navarra said, with as much cheer as she could muster in her exhausted state.
"It turns out we both want the same thing, Irina's happiness. We've just gone about it in different ways."
She looked over at the mantel. There, above the fireplace, hung a huge portrait in a gilded frame, an exact likeness of Irina. "That is my beloved Tatiana," Strahd said, when he noticed Navarra admiring the painting. Fixed on the canvas by masterful brushstrokes, flowing locks of red hair hung down in elegant waves around the soft features of Tatiana's face. Navarra felt her own hair, and realized that Helga had given her the same style. "Do you like the guest room?" he asked.
"What?"
Navarra said, turning to him.
"Oh, yes, it's very nice."
Strahd's smile broadened. "Good. If you behave yourself, it's yours." "This is a new color." He touched the vibrant golden tips of her hair. During the night, Navarra had shed winter. All her blue locks were now the warm colors of the current season.
"I'm wearing autumn," she said. "It's the season of giving."
"Speaking of giving, I have a gift for you." Strahd opened the box in his hand and pulled out a red jeweled necklace. "May I?" He held the piece up to her neck. It was the same kind of jewelry that Strahd's consorts wore. Navarra nodded, then lifted her hair and let Strahd fasten the clasp. He caressed the back of her neck with his fingers, and her skin crawled. "Now you can talk to me whenever you wish, in my mind," he said, "and I can talk to you in yours."
Telepathy with Strahd. Wonderful, she thought sarcastically. Wait, does this mean you can read my mind?
No, I can read your mind without recourse to such objects. But this allows us to communicate when we please. It also allows me to know where you are, always, no matter how far away you go. So, what shall we do today, my beautiful elf?
All right, I can do this, Navarra thought. Just pretend to be his friend.
He was Vasily, after all, and she had liked Vasily. Strahd was standing very close, gazing shamelessly down her dress. Navarra rolled her eyes and took a step back.
"You like music?" she asked.
"Very much."
"There's a song I know, a new one from Theodore. I think you'll like it."
She had thought of it often when she dated Vasily.
"I could sing to you."
Navarra was not the best musician or actor, and she was only decent at dancing. But when it came to singing, her voice was almost as magical as her spells. Strahd was pleased with the idea and sat back down in his chair. Navarra cleared her throat, wishing she'd had time to tune her vocals, then took a deep breath and began. It was a song about longing, a song about destiny and sailing the high seas, a song about freedom and discovery. Her dulcet soprano layered chorus upon verse, shaping the slow tempo of the melody into a rising wave. It rolled over the room like a powerful swell, and Navarra was swept up in the passion of her own song. When she finished, she looked at Strahd and grew worried. He did not clap or cheer. He merely frowned and turned his face away. "I have things to which I must attend," he said, getting up. His tone had changed, more aloof and less sultry than before. He walked to the door, and without turning to face her, he said, "You may go anywhere in the castle walls, anywhere except the dungeons." Then he left. Navarra just stood there, unsure what to make of his sudden departure. "The master likes you." Escher, one of Strahd's consorts, had come and was standing in the doorway. He sighed, then entered the study, sitting down on one of the plush sofas. He wore a necklace almost identical to hers. "You look like you don't believe me. I'm quite serious. In fact, I think you could become the favorite." He spoke with a slow, suave drawl.
"Me?"
Navarra gave a nervous chuckle.
"What about you? Your name is Escher, right?"
"Yes, ma'am. I used to be the only one around here with a flair for music. You go on singing like you do, and Strahd will have me locked in a crypt soon enough."
"He wouldn't lock you away because of me, surely?"
"Darling, you don't know Ravenloft. I've seen consorts come and go as fast as the moon waxes and wanes. I fear my time is coming. I've already been here 10 years, and that's longer than most. Of course, Anastasia prides herself on being here the longest. But eventually, we all go."
"Strahd locks his consorts away? In the crypts?"
"Only when he's had his fill of us. Who knows how many are down there now? The others think they are something special, that eventually Strahd will realize it's them he wants, and not Tatiana. It's wishful thinking. I know, because I wish it too. But the Master is already getting tired of me. I can see it. You know you're in trouble when he says the word bored in your company. He's said it to me. Navarra stepped closer to the vampire.
Do you remember who you were before you were turned?
I remember, though my memories seem like they're from someone else's life. I was a bard then. I came to Barovia with a group of friends. Friends, I think that's what I used to call them. It was Roland who convinced me to come. Yes, that's right. We were lovers. We had heard of an evil vampire who was tormenting people in a cursed land. Roland thought we could make a difference, thought we could get rid of the vampire and change the world. He was an idealist. Navarra took another step closer, her hands clasped.
What happened to him?
Strahd killed him, along with all the others. But Strahd took a liking to me. He turned me right when I had a blade at his throat. I don't know why I hated the Master so much back then. It's strange. I remember the events and vaguely what I thought, but the feelings are gone. None of that matters now. All that matters is the Master. Escher's lips curled into a vague smile, and he closed his eyes as if dreaming. Navarra's mouth turned down. This vampire spawn was a person. He'd had a life, and it was all gone, stolen.
Oh, Escher!
Navarra was inches from him. His eyes flashed open. The smell of your blood is tantalizing. Navarra's hands went to her throat. Don't worry. I can't drink from you. Master's orders. But as he spoke, it was not the fear of his bite that filled her with a sense of dread. It was the thought of what had happened to his soul. What would happen to hers? Navarra shook her head. She needed to get out of this castle. Don't look so distraught, Escher said. You'll get used to things around here soon enough. Once you see the Master more often, you won't want to leave. Navarra felt sick at the thought of staying. Sadly, the Master has been away a lot, he continued. Not only chasing you and your companions, but also posing as Valaki's burgomaster. Why, he's even started a new orphanage. Navarra's stomach tightened.
Oh, mercy! He's drinking the children.
For shame, Navarra, no! The Master is a gentleman, and has a strict rule against killing children for such purposes. No. It's their parents we're drinking. Why do you think there are so many orphans about who need care? Navarra was appalled.
Escher, she said, changing the subject, since you're a musician, would you like to perform a short musical with me?
It was just one of her ideas to keep Strahd entertained and distracted from his evil doings. Escher bowed his head. It's been a while since I've teamed up with a rival, but the Master is sure to notice me with you by my side. I accept. For the rest of the day, they practiced 2 songs from a play they both knew well, until in the early evening Navarra heard a summons from Strahd inside her head. He was speaking through the pendant around her neck, and wanted her to join him in the great hall. Upon entering the hall, Navarra was greeted by Vasily.
Navarra, Vasily said with a smile, I hope you had a good day.
He pulled out a chair from the dining table. His accent was that of Vasily, but now she could hear Strahd's voice behind the facade. It was surreal seeing Vasily again. Even his features betrayed a hint of who he really was. How had she not seen it before? Was he only being Vasily now to toy with her, to flaunt in her face that they had once dated. He kissed her hand, and Navarra rolled her eyes. She sat down and tried not to think about the last time she had been here, that fateful dinner. "I've been pondering what to do about Henry," Vasily said. The butler Cyrus came out with a bowl of pumpkin soup for Navarra. The delicious flavor was a sharp contrast to her distasteful dining companion. "You know, I had it all planned out at Yester Hill," Vasily said, leaning back in his chair. "I knew exactly where I was going to execute Henry. Irina would have been there to see it. She would have seen how weak he really is. But he kept her from me. Of course, I was going to kill him anyway, but then you... He shook his finger at her with a smirk. "I wasn't expecting that. Tell me, what do you think I should do with Henry?" Navarra's heavy eyelids blinked slowly as she sipped from her spoon. "Leave him alone?" "Now, Navarra, you know I can't do that." Navarra's unfocused gaze did not look up from her soup. "Then let's not talk about him." Vasily tried to strike up a conversation about Vallaki and the time they had spent together, but Navarra stayed quiet, partly out of defiance and partly out of sheer exhaustion. When Strahd asked if she would like dessert, she took one last bite of soup, rested the spoon in the bowl, and said, "Actually, I'd like to go to bed." "Of course. You need rest." Vasily stood and waited for her to get up. Then he kissed her hand and said good night. "Until tomorrow, then." What game was Strahd playing? Throwing her in prison, then giving her a cozy room and good food? Did he honestly think she could like him? She was too tired to figure it out now. That night, she collapsed onto her new bed and fell asleep without summoning Gostomir. In the morning, Helga arrived with a breakfast of sausage, beans, and fried tomatoes.
"The master wants to see you in the courtyard after you've eaten," Helga said in her timid voice.
Navarra finished scribbling a sketch in her journal, then hopped out of bed and opened her closet.
"Helga,"
she said, looking at the dresses,
"if I give you a drawing, could you take it to those witches you were telling me about? I'd like them to make me a special gown."
Navarra wanted to look beautiful for Strahd, but she would do it on her own terms. She handed the maid the sketch she had drawn upon waking. Helga agreed to give it to them, but did not think they would have time.
"They're probably too busy making potions," the maid said.
Navarra's ear pricked up at that.
"Potions? The master has them working on all kinds of alchemy."
"Navarra," Strahd's voice said in her head. Navarra swallowed. "I have Bucephalus saddled and ready to take us somewhere special. Come." Navarra put on a green dress and scarfed down her food. When she arrived in the courtyard, Strahd was waiting beside his nightmare. "Good morning, my beautiful elf," he said.
"His name is Bucephalus?"
Navarra nodded at the nightmare. "Yes, I broke him out of the 9 hells." Strahd held out his hand for her. Navarra frowned, but took it. He kissed her hand, then said, "I would like to take you to the Tsar Falls." Navarra inwardly sighed, relieved he was taking her to a place far from her friends. Hopefully, this would be her chance to keep his mind off them. Navarra let Strahd help her onto the nightmare. Then he sat behind her, his arms hugging her sides as he held the reins. He gave the nightmare a kick, and Bucephalus took off, flying into the sky. Ravenloft grew smaller and smaller as they flew west over the hills. Treetops dotted the misty slopes, and the winding Ivlis River became a small ribbon below them. In a short time, the nightmare was already descending toward the thundering waterfall. They landed on a grassy ledge by the crest of the cascade. Strahd helped Navarra down and dismissed his steed with a wave of his hand. They sat on a rocky outcropping, the water crashing below them. Then Strahd pulled out a sheet of paper from his coat. He began to read. "Gaze into his eyes, and you shall see the reflection of two worlds above, one of which is mere mortality. The other will be his kiss of true love that shall set you free." Navarra bit her lip to keep from laughing. "I wrote that just last night," Strahd said. "I thought to myself, what would Vasily say to the lovely Navarra? I think I might even use the poem for my next novel." Navarra rolled her eyes. She rolled them so often that she was beginning to worry they might roll out of their sockets.
"Honestly, I think the poem falls short," Navarra said, unable to contain herself. "Like many of Vasily's books, it shows that you don't have much experience with real love. Because when you turn someone, you take away their ability to actually love you."
Strahd frowned, and his eyes hardened. Navarra's heart started racing. She had done it this time. Her stupid mouth was going to get her killed. It was going to get her friends killed. It was... "All right," Strahd said, and his face relaxed. "What is this love that I am missing?" Navarra looked down at her hands and muttered.
"Well, for one thing, you're not very fun."
Then she quickly cleared her throat and looked up, watching for any change in his expression.
"I mean, fun depends on the very same thing as love, the freedom of the unexpected. What is a joke but the subversion of expectations? You take your listener one way, and then the punchline makes him trip over his own thoughts."
Strahd moved closer to her. "So, what did you expect from this outing, Navarra?"
"I thought maybe we could talk about—"
Strahd pushed her, not violently, but with a strong nudge and a playful grin. Navarra toppled over the edge of the falls, falling with the water until she was halfway down the cataract, when her descent slowed. Now she was drifting down like a feather, and she looked up to see Strahd leaning over the edge where they had been sitting. He was casting a spell with his hand. Navarra floated down, riding on his magic, until she was a few feet above the water. Then the spell released, and she splashed into the pool. Navarra, completely taken off guard, came up from the water laughing. She laughed long and hard. Strahd removed his cloak and performed a perfect swan dive into the pool. When he came up, he flicked water into her face. She slapped water back at him, and they went on circling and splashing each other until Strahd swam out of reach.
"That's not fair,"
Navarra said, swimming after him.
"How are you so fast? I thought vampires were burned by running water."
Strahd let Navarra catch up to him. "You forget. I am the land." Navarra splashed him. Strahd chuckled. Then he leaned in toward her, his red eyes looking into her green ones.
"What color were your eyes?"
Navarra asked.
"Before you became what you are now."
Strahd changed his irises to a rich brown, the same brown as Vasily's. It was just an illusion spell, but Navarra thought the color was more real somehow.
"What were you like?"
she asked.
"Before Barovia?"
"That was a long time ago. I scarcely remember." Navarra tilted her head, curious.
"Go on,"
she said. "I do remember that I never wanted to be a soldier."
"Really?"
Navarra's teeth chattered. She tried to keep her arms and legs moving. "I would have rather gone to school to learn the wonders of the natural and supernatural worlds. I remember when my mother hired a tutor from the University of Ryland. It was prestigious in those days. His first day on the job, my father fired him, then told me schooling was for priests and faggots. I was to become a knight, train under him, learn to be a man."
Strahd's mouth turned down in loathing, and his eyes looked off into the distance. I have learned much since then. Collected books from every corner of the world. Studied every subject known to sages, both ancient and modern. He looked back at Navarra. I could show you. In fact, I thought tonight you might want to look through my telescope. Navarra didn't reveal her ignorance of what a telescope was, but instead said, I have something to show you too. A performance. Navarra Productions, starring myself and Escher. I would like that very much. But Navarra, he gently lifted her chin with his thumb and forefinger, your lips are blue. They swam to the shore, and Strahd collected his cloak and summoned Bucephalus. A bit of magic sufficed to dry off their clothes. This time, as they rowed across the sky, Navarra was struck by the rugged beauty of the valley. It seemed new again, as it had when she first came into Barovia. When they arrived back at Ravenloft, Escher had a crew of ghouls in the throne room, hammering and painting a set for the play. Navarra went to her room and changed into a cream-colored dress with red lacing. She practiced with Escher before dinner, and, after she had eaten with Strahd as her sole companion, the performance began in front of all the members of the court, except for the ghouls. The other vampires looked on with sour expressions, but Rahadin's scowl was the most foreboding of all. Escher disguised himself to look like Strahd, per Navarra's request. Together they sang and danced to an accompaniment of orchestral music that Escher wove with bardic magic. Escher played his part well, that of a lonely man imprisoned in a tower, who pined after a beautiful woman, played by Navarra. When the play ended, Strahd gave a standing ovation, and showered Navarra with praise. Everyone else stood and clapped as well, but clearly not because they wanted to. Come with me, Strahd said to Navarra, and took her to the North Tower. They walked up the railless staircase in the red glow of the crystal heart. This time the tower did not shake. When Strahd noticed Navarra's eyes being drawn to the strangely pulsing heart in the center of the tower, he said, It is the seal of my curse and my hedge of protection. Navarra remembered when her eldritch blasts had failed to harm him at Yester Hill. Protection? She asked. He raised an eyebrow, then took one of the halberds hanging on the wall and struck the crystal heart. The weapon rang like a bell, its haft splintered, and the pieces fell into the darkness below. It is indestructible, as am I, unless the curse is broken. He looked at the heart with disgust. Navarra watched the pulsing light. You really want the curse to be broken, don't you? Have you not been listening? Strahd took her hand and led her to the top of the tower, where they met his telescope, a contraption for peering into the heavens. With a wave of his hand, the clouds in the night sky parted, and Navarra saw the stars as she had never seen them before. Up close they were even more spectacular. Strahd talked with her late into the night, regaling her with legends about the constellations, the cycles of the zodiac, the wandering stars, and the gods who had made them. Navarra yawned. Am I boring you? Strahd's voice had an edge to it, but he was smiling fondly. No, not at all, she said, and it was the truth. I'm just tired. I should go to bed. What shall we do tomorrow, then? Navarra thought. I've heard rumours about a mad mage on Mount Baratok. That loon? So he is still around? Did he really fight you? He tried. You let him live? His spirit is broken. He is quite harmless now. When I conquered him, he fled to the mountains and has not come down since. He is an elusive fellow,
But if we search hard enough, we might be able to find him.
If we do, you won't kill him, will you?
Navarra, what do you take me for? Why would I do that? I may be a vampire, but I'm not a monster. When Navarra went back to her room, she hummed one of the songs from her performance. She walked to the beat of the tune and reached over her shoulder to scratch Herkomoid. Herkomoid? But there was no dragon, only a cold chain around her neck. The song died in Navarra's throat, and she entered the lounge with plodding feet and a heavy heart. She tried to undo the pendant's clasp, but it was locked with a magical curse she could not break. Sitting on her bed, she took out the chameleon's tail she had stolen from Escher and stashed it under her pillow. It was the material component for disguising oneself. She wasn't sure if or when she would use it, but she figured she needed to start somewhere. Then she lit her candle, and Gostomir appeared.
"Navarra,"
he said, as his ghostly figure circled her.
"Are you all right? Are you hurt? Let me see your fingers. You still have those, don't you? What about your teeth? Are they all still there?" "My fingers and teeth are fine," she said in a low monotone.
He looked around.
"Where are we? This room is better than your old one. You must be making a good impression to sleep here. You are alone, right? No pesky roommate?"
Navarra leaned back on the bed, plopping her head on the pillow.
"I'm so tired." "Poor you! What terrible torments has that vampire put you through? What torture?"
Navarra pulled the blankets over herself, reflecting on the events of the day. Why had she laughed so much? She had been with Strahd since breakfast. Why was she not annoyed, or angry, or repulsed? He had not charmed her with his vampire magic, and yet neither the sound of his voice nor the touch of his hand made her cringe any more. She felt ill thinking about it now. Her fingers ran over the satin sheets.
"It's the worst, Gostomir," she said. "It's the worst kind of torture."